As most of you know, Gary was my golf buddy. And when you golf with Gary, you have to be ready for anything. You have to be ready to go anywhere to help him with his golf game. What most of you don't know about Gary are the other things outside of the college that he was involved in and where he came from. This modest man is very accomplished and most deserving of the award he's getting tonight. He grew up in Havre, Montana, where he shared the ownership of a ranch with his brothers, a big-time ranch and a lot of hard work. He also was a railroad engineer and in fact retired as a railroad engineer before he came to Klamath Falls with Martha Anne. When he got here, he displayed some of his other qualities that are so appreciated by so many. For instance, he was a musician. He can play any reed instrument and he can play it from just picking it up, and he doesn't need music or notes. And one of the nice things he did is he and a group played every week at the senior center. And he told me that one time an older person dropped on the floor, fainted, and I said, well, what did you do? And he says, well, we just changed the song to Glenn Miller's In the Mood and just kept right on going. So he has a good sense of humor too. He was also an accomplished record collector. He has thousands of 33 and 78 RPM records that relate to his musical background. He's a collector of antique cars. Many of you have noticed his Cadillac or his Chevy in the Klamath Cruise. He also did silent things like he took care of the yard. He did mowing in the yard at the president's house. He did a lot of the maintenance, and never did he charge the college for it. I would say, bring the receipts back and we'll reimburse you. Oh, I'm not worried about that. He's a master cook. Was a perfect compliment to Martha Anne. And Gary, this is a well-deserved award, and wish I was going to be there to see you get it, and wish you the best. And since you aren't here, I guess I'll trade this one in for some other kind of club. See you later.
I've known Gary for 14 years, and when I first came, my daughter was 5, and she started school at Roosevelt when she was in first grade. And you know, by the time they're in 4th grade, they start to play the recorder and learn to play music. So my daughter was really interested in music and started playing the flute. But when she got in junior high school, she really wanted to do jazz band. Well, you know, you're not going to play the flute in jazz band here. And of course, Gary was quite the musician, and you know, he was a saxophone player. And I can remember always we would do some events with Martha Anne on New Year's Eve, but Gary had to leave because he was doing some New Year's Eve gig with his saxophone and a group of people. And so we knew that Gary played saxophone. And so in our conversations together, we had shared with Gary that Alicia wanted to play saxophone, and he said, well, you know, the keen on a saxophone is very similar for the keen on a flute, so that it would be an easy transition for her. And we'd go, yeah, right, okay. And he says, and by the way, I have a saxophone, and I'd be more than happy to sort of give her lessons and see if she would like to play or if she catches on to it. And at that time, you know, they had lived in Pine Grove, and then when Martha Anne became president, they actually just lived up the street from us. And so Alicia was able to walk to the house, quite a steep hill, I may add, and Gary would tutor her in how to play the saxophone. And we still weren't convinced, and at that point she was in Ponderosa Junior High, and Don Butts was the band teacher and saxophone early in the morning. And before we were willing, well, I was willing to commit to, you know, rent a saxophone or even buy one, I wanted to make sure that this was really something she was willing to do. So at that point, because Gary wasn't playing and it was sort of off season, I guess, in the playing, he says, well, she can use my saxophone. And so here was this saxophone in sort of its original case, and Alicia would take the saxophone to music with her. And Don Butts looked at the saxophone and he said, where'd you get that saxophone from? And she said, well, Gary Dow let me use it. Well, little did we know that it was really a very premier saxophone. And so I think that just says a lot about who Gary is, that he was willing to let this little girl in the 7th grade take his saxophone to her lessons in the morning before school started, because that's when jazz band started. And so that's a really fond memory I have about Gary and his sort of generosity and really how he invited us into their lives as Martha Anne did too. So that's one story I have about Gary and especially my daughter. Gary was absolutely wonderful, always being a great supporter, not only of Martha Anne, but also of the institution and the kinds of things we wanted to do together. And it was wonderful.
One of the things I remember on our trip to China, we had an opportunity to go to China about 3 summers ago with the Oregon Tech basketball team, and Martha Anne and Gary, and then Judy and I, and Mike Schell, along with our 10 basketball players. And I remember driving through Beijing just after we got there, and I remember Gary going, "Oh my God," probably said it 50 times, about 10 seconds apart, because it's kind of like watching a Nintendo game or something. These people are flying all over the place, the cars going in different directions and cutting in. It was just an amazing situation. The other thing I think was interesting on the trip is because I was the head coach and Martha Anne was the president of the school, they put us and Mike Schell at the #1 table, and Mike was our athletic director, and then Judy and Gary would be sitting at the #2 table down a little ways from us. So, of course, Martha Ann and I made a point that we were #1 and they were over at #2, and we did that on every banquet we went to. But that was a lot of fun, and of course, I gave Gary a bad time all the time. I always had him sit in the back seat every time we went someplace or to get in the back of the bus and stuff. So, and then the other thing I think on the trip that was interesting was, Gary and I both thought guys would be kind of nice to lose some weight on this trip, and there was no question we were able to do it. The whole team lost about 10 pounds in 16 days over there. And the situation was that we were all we'd go to these banquets and they have all these they'd have these critters and different things on the plate. Nobody'd want to eat them because we're a little worried what they were. And I know we ate a lot of watermelon on the trip. That's about the only thing we knew what we were eating. But it was interesting talking about it. We figured if we went over there for a couple months, we could probably lose 25 pounds real easy and do it real quick. But it was a great trip, and it was great going with Gary and Martha Anne, and it gives us a real chance to get to know Gary.
Gary loved basketball games, and Martha Anne loved the L's. And so as we'd come up to our seats every game, they'd stop and chat with them, and then sometimes chat during halftime. And it was a sad year not to look down and to see them and not to have those times to chat. But I think they really enjoyed those times where they could socialize and Gary could get Martha Anne away a little bit from the office. The word that comes to mind, the first, is loyalty. Loyalty to the institution, loyalty to the people that work here, and engendering a feeling when you meet them about how much they care about OIT and about what happens here. And Gary often took a back seat to Martha Anne and provided a lot of support for her so she could do her job. But it was very clear is very clear to everybody that he loved the institution, and maybe even more than that, loved the people here. And he's such a warm person. It was just so easy to get to know him from the minute that they both arrived in town. I think he added a balance to her single-mindedness sometimes about the institution to kind of stop and breathe a little. I think also service. I mean, there is nobody that gave more service to the institution than they as a couple.
Gary Dow was a man of integrity, character, and good humor. He selflessly gave of himself and his family's resources, both time and money, to advance Oregon Institute of Technology. The university is better for his efforts. The lives he has touched will never be the same because of his influence. His lasting service is the example he has set for us all. Thank you, Gary.